Good morning, students. This is actually going to be a short video. I'm just going to talk about line graphs, not in very much detail because for the most part, line graphs and bar graphs are very, very similar and therefore do not require any additional explanation. All right. So both of them have an X and a Y axis. Both of them require you to have a title, which this graph does not. Both of them require you to have proper increments here. You can see you have a skip counting pattern here. It goes from 200 to 400 to 600, so it's plus 200 every time. Okay, the skip count pattern is important. All right, both of them should have a title here on this axis and a title here on this axis. All right, and both of them represent data. So the major difference between a bar graph and a line graph is that a line graph is used to discuss changes over time. That means that this section down here, this is about time. So in this graph, because they're just showing you some basic information, they don't tell you what it is, but it could be that this is in minutes. Okay, so maybe that's the title, is minutes. All right, so changes over time is really important. Maybe it's years. We don't know what this graph is about, all right? But it has a time factor, whereas a bar graph is really just to compare two or more sets of data. We do actually compare data in all types of graphing. That is the point of graphing, is to allow us to compare. But a bar graph very specifically gives us some connections like that, and that's helpful for us, okay? So over time. This is very, very key. It's so key, I've written it twice. Trends over time. So let's discuss what a trend is, okay? A trend is the way something changes over time. All right, so for example, right here in week 0, we see we probably got about 210 or so, maybe 220. And here in week 10, we're at about maybe 300. So the trend in this data is that it peaks, but then it goes down again. That's the trend, okay? We want to see long-term what's happening. So long-term what's happening is it rises up until about minute 7. And then drops again. Okay, that's a trend. That's what we see what is happening over a period of time. So let's look at another one here. This one here, this is about cookies, and this is actually about cookie sales. So this is a bad title. We should actually say it's cookie sales. It's also a bad graph because we don't have a title over here. We don't know what these numbers are, but let's say this is number of boxes. Okay, and then obviously this is weeks, which we can see because it actually says weeks. All right, and again here we can see that this is right here. It's just a bit above 140. Right here, halfway between, that would be 150. So if we had to figure out what this line here is, we can't tell exactly, but it's going to be close to probably about 144 or 43 or something like that, okay? How do you figure that out? You've got to figure out what your pattern is here. This pattern matters. As this pattern changes, how you read your graph changes. You have to base your data on your pattern. When you read this, you have to know what your pattern says. If you don't know what your pattern says, you cannot read this graph. And then down here, this point is probably about 78, maybe, thereabouts. Week here in week 3 is about 138, maybe. This one right here is 128, maybe even 130, somewhere in there. It's hard to tell exactly, so if you're close, I will accept it. All right. Now, what's the trend in this data? Or let me ask you a different question. In 1 week, there was, the store was closed because of a holiday. Which week was the store closed? Which week was the store closed? Well, that's easy to see. It was obviously closed right here. How do I know it was closed there? It was closed there because they didn't sell very much. So it was closed in week 2. Here's a different question. How much more was sold in week 3 than in week 2? That's easy. That's week 3. That's week 2. How much more is a subtraction question? So 60 more boxes, not cookies, boxes, because remember, this is about boxes, okay? Then we can also have multi-line graphs. So you're going to see this in the grade, and actually in both works. And multi-line graphs allow us to look over time and compare things, okay? So in this case, we can see that the trend for cookies is that it is going up. In fact, the trend for all of them, for both cookies and muffins, is that it goes up. Whereas the trend for scones is it doesn't change very much. It changes a bit, but not a lot. But muffins and cookies both increase their sales as the week goes on. Okay, see that? A trend is kind of just smoothing out the line so you can kind of see the way it goes. All right, so I'm not going to give you more than that because this work here, it's not actually that tricky. Okay, but I am going to talk about a few questions in your work because this part is tricky, okay? Now, there's all sorts of information here that you have to pay attention to. For example, you can see here that 1 carton of eggs, this is called a carton, okay, is worth $2.50. So, and this graph is about cartons, okay? You can see that in the title. So how many cartons of eggs were sold in week 2? That's simple. You just read the graph. And how many more cartons of eggs were sold in week 5 than week 3? Again, that's pretty simple. I already showed you how to do that. How many eggs were sold in week 1? Now it's not asking about cartons anymore. So first we have to know the number of cartons, okay, times 12. Because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 eggs in a carton. All right, so the number of cartons times eggs gives us the number of eggs. This question is not about cartons. Every year I get students who answer this many cartons were sold, but the question is not how many cartons, it's how many eggs. So you have to figure out how many cartons, and then you have to multiply it by the number of eggs. Okay? Now, this is a question about averages. You know how to do that already. That's a mean. Okay? But remember, this is about week 4. How many days are there in a week? There are 7 days in a week. Remember that. 7 days in a week. So you're dividing by 7. How much was collected from selling the eggs in week 3? All right. So again, we need the number of cartons times the price of eggs. This one here, a little bit simpler. You just have to compare numbers, pay attention. The dotted line is Katie and the solid line is Jason. Don't get them confused, all right? All right, grade 6s. You right here, you've got 3 lines going on in your graph. That's easy enough to do. You've got white bread, cornbread, and wheat bread. You can see the trends over time, okay? And much like the grade 6's work, you've got to pay attention to the details. When it says here, describe, you have to tell what's happening with the sales. So you look at white bread, which is, I actually can't tell on my picture here. White bread is this right here. This is the white bread line. What's happening with that line? Describe it. Tell me what's going on with it. All right. Then estimate what happens in week 11. Put a dot on here. What do you think? Where do you think that next dot's going to be in connect? For example, is the wheat bread dot going to be like that? Does that make sense? You tell me. Maybe there's a better line. Okay. And then this last page here, what was the profit? You can see that there. It's profit in dollars. Where was the least profit? Where was the more profit? And then it starts asking questions like, she changes her product line. So when does she get a new famous manufacturer. Where can we see that she suddenly, things are going well for her? Tell me when that happens. All right. So go ahead and get started on this. A lot of you have not yet submitted any graphing work. I expect all of it to be in on Tuesday. There is no school on Friday and Monday. That doesn't mean goof off. That means get all your work done so that when we start on Tuesday, you can have a fresh start and everything has been handed in.